Okay, let's discuss labeling, its practical uses and alternatives. Labeling is very important in language development, science, and communication in society. Without labels, it would be very hard for people to communicate and express an idea and convey thought, to convey or project their sentiment, thought, or point of view without using labels. We're living in a world where language has developed from symbols which had names. This is what labeling is. When you see something in nature and you give it a name is a label. So the very first language is where symbolic, involved things that had names that everybody understood. Hieroglyphs and pictorial, picture form languages were the first ones. Art. So you all know what a dog is. So when I paint a dog, you know that that's a dog. Yeah. And if you was to see my painting and then go and explain it to someone else and explain what you saw, the language you use would involve labels or names. This made it easier for us to get messages to one another, to convey, to communicate with one another. This is one of the reasons why we outcompeted other hominid and other sapiens, Homo sapiens. Labeling is fundamental to the existence of society. Yeah, without it, we'll become ineffective communicators. We'll become just like animals. We'll have to communicate by telepathy. So, before we start to get rid of labels, we need to have found an alternative. We need to go all the way to zero from the origins of language and develop a different way of communicating, a different way of expressing language. Yeah, that doesn't involve labels. You can't just say, I object to labels being used, so I don't want anyone in society to use labels. If you object to labels being used, that's you, that's good, keep it to yourself. Which brings me on to another issue related to it. Those of us who object to being labeled. Yeah. Now, if society, by way of research, reasoning, yeah, or by the dictating, um, how do you call it? Dictating framework in terms of what type of reasoning they use. If they've come up with a generally accepted framework for labeling, and you come along and say, right, I object to being classified as that, keep your objections to yourself. You have the right to object. Yeah, it's democratic. But in democracy, sometimes in democracy, the loser always has to, grin and bear it. That's how it works. You might support the blue party and the red one wins. You have to grin and bear it. Or vice versa. You support red and blue wins. You have to grin and bear it and you learn to coexist. So if the whole of society has chosen to give animals, plants, objects names, yeah, to describe what they are, to help us communicate and convey messages, and to also help us in research in terms of developing the human race, you can't come along and say, I object to being labeled like this. If the framework we've developed labels you as that, that's what society labels you as. You don't have to associate yourself with that. You could say, well, you can call me whatever you want, but that's not what I think I am. But do not try to force people to get rid of these labels which have been around for like 100,000 years, some of them. You're going to start telling us that you want fish to be called cockroaches. No, you can't. If you want to do that, yeah, do it in a sensible way. Offer on an alternative. Go right back from scratch and try to figure out how we're going to communicate and convey our ideas and messages, and also research and develop further if we don't have appropriate labels for things, names and labels for things. When you figure that out, then you can come and say, here's an alternative to the labeling that you have that covers all the different components of labeling, like language, communication, and science. Yeah, and it works as well. It's a bit like the flat earth. If you can come up with a map that predicts where the sun is going to be, yeah, and you tell us that the earth is flat, if it works, it works. We don't care. Yeah, if the science behind it works and I can use that map to know that the sun's going to be here when I look in the sky, the moon's going to be there, the stars are going to be there, and everything is where your map predicts it will be, or says it should be, when you orient yourself, yeah, then that works. It doesn't matter if it's flat or bow. It's the same thing with people who object to labeling. If you can come up with a different way of us, a different way we can do it, that basically can cover all the components that lead to labeling, then there's nothing wrong with that. Because how are you going to train children on how to speak if you can't use labels like man, woman, cat, dog? How are they going to know how to speak? You're going to have to project something, give it a name. Yeah, a picture paints 1,000 words. Yeah, but one name, yeah, can conjure up a picture. One name, yeah, one word can conjure up a picture, which is 1,000 words. So to help us communicate more efficiently and process more data without having to spend so much time explaining like I'm doing now, we come up with one word labels, yeah, that help convey messages and make society much more efficient. So those of you who object to the labels we give things, how are we going to train children in language and science? Yeah, it starts from there. All right, and then when you're in science, how are you going to be efficient, yeah, if you don't use appropriate labels? So I wanted everybody to be careful when they those of you who object to being labeled as things, be very careful, because we all have a right to believe in what we want. If I don't associate myself with a label, you can call me whatever you want, yeah, but if I don't think I'm that, yeah, I'm not going to associate myself with that. Okay, but I'm not going to stop you from using a generically accepted term to describe me, yeah, but I'm not going to associate myself with that. Yeah, you detach yourself from the subject matter. When I read science, yeah, and it says, right, you're a negroid, yeah, that one's a caucasioid, that's a mongoloid, that's an Indian. I say, okay, when I'm doing science, that's what I'll use. But for me, I'm an earthling. Those are earthlings. To me, they're like 10 pin balls. You blank objects that are just earthling. And I'll describe them in terms more of physics. Yeah, that's a biological agent. That's a biological agent, and they're composed of molecules and atoms. I'm more um, empathetic to the physics way of looking at people than the social way of looking at people. Yeah, but when you're solving crime and things like that, and you go to a crime scene and somebody asks you, "Can you describe who did it?" You're gonna need to use these labels, and it will also help with law enforcement if we have appropriate labels. Because if you don't know what to call someone, how are you gonna give a witness statement? So there are practical uses, and let's not joke about with these things. When you object to labels, keep that to yourself. Yeah. But when we have scientifically and socially adopted labels, don't mess with that. Yeah. I know you're a cynic, but these are serious things.